Bees are the only enemy in Terraria able to damage other enemies. They are hostile to everything except other bees. When at least one bee is alive, Queen Bee also joins the bee faction and can damage other enemies. That's why you can insta-kill her by running her into a group of enemies. That's the challenge, using only the strength of Queen Bee and her bee army. How far into the game can you make it? This does not include any player-allied bees, like bee nades or the bee gun. I have to use bee enemies. A bee will aggro to whatever is closest to it. If it's an enemy, the two will trade contact damage, usually killing the bee. After 1.4.4, they do give enemies iframes, so you can't just stack a giant pile of them to insta-kill bosses. Queen Bee works the same way, except she will only aggro to the player, only her contact damage can damage enemies, and she needs a bee alive to join the bee faction. I make a medium-sized master world with the corruption as the world evil. It's medium because I'm not going to need more space for the wall of flesh. I've got bees. Bees shred the wall. Master difficulty should actually make the run easier, assuming I can stay alive. Okay, I'm cutting in here because bees don't scale like everything else in the game. Their expert mode health and damage is actually only 20% higher than it is on classic, and on master mode it's 80% instead of 3 times as much. Master mode is still the best difficulty to do this on though, because their damage will scale into hard mode, whereas the classic ones will be stuck at 20 the entire time. Step 1 is to find the jungle for the bees. I run into a hive quite quickly and start gathering hive blocks. Remember, I can't kill these bees, so I have to be very cautious with sealing them off. The enemies in the jungle are pretty easily avoided, and I get a good chunk of HP from life crystals, until a ghost shows up, because it's Halloween. It's a good opportunity to build some houses and kill myself. That lets me craft beehives using a heavy workbench in a graveyard, giving me access to an actual weapon. Kind of. I've got 9 of them. I can use these beehives to get stingers to craft queen bee summons, but the bees really don't want to cooperate. The first 4 hives get stuck attacking man-eaters, which are completely useless to me. The next ones get stuck on a ghost, because fucking hollow. But the last one actually targets a hornet, so now we have a single stinger. After an hour and a half. I checked my matchup against the Eye of Cthulhu, and it's not great. Queen Bee does a lot of damage, and I can't kill the servants. I can barely even damage the Eye. I can dodge most of Queen Bee's attacks, but even one hit from her is too many. Unfortunately, without knockback immunity or the ability to reforge for more defense, my only real option is face-tanking bees to kill the Eye. The bee machine marches onward, towards the corruption. I need the Goblin badly. Having a full set of warding reforges would let me exist near Queen Bee without instantly dying. I also need a jungle close to home so I can resummon Queen Bee if needed, so I make an artificial one quickly. Then, it's off to the underground desert, which is home to the single most useful item in this challenge, the magic conch. Queen Bee is one of 2 bosses in the game that will never despawn unless every player in the world is dead. But she actually needs to physically travel the distance, so you can use the magic conch to keep her in the world but away from you, letting you buy time to do whatever you need. That's particularly important for the goblins, because Queen Bee very quickly fills up the local NPC cap. By the time she kills any currently spawned enemies, there will be dozens of bees, preventing anything new from spawning. That means anytime I need Queen Bee to kill waves of enemies, goblin invasions, pirate invasions, slime rains, even just farming enemies, I need to teleport away, despawn all the bees, let her travel far enough away that I can let more enemies spawn, let her fly back and kill them, then loop this process. The problem is, if I just do that, Queen Bee can't damage anything because she's barely enraged and there aren't any bees. Queen Bee has a 2-step enraging process. If she is on the surface, she enrages partially, and if she's not in the jungle, she enrages partially. If she's both not in the jungle and on the surface, she enrages fully and rapid fires bees. Otherwise, her bee spawning is actually kinda slow. So I also need to spawn a bee every time, either by breaking a hive block or a beehive in a safe location to activate bee mode. Then, and only then, can Queen Bee actually defeat the goblins. Until she dies. That's where I got multiple abominations. But the second Queen Bee, kills me. Queen Bee number 3 defeats the goblins though. With the extra defense from my reforges, I can start the cage match of Big Bee versus Big Worm, with me as the referee. I summon Queen Bee at the jungle and teleport to the corruption to give me time to spawn the Eater. The Eater has the advantage here. His multiple segments will shred through Queen Bee's HP, and since we're underground, Queen Bee is weakened and not fully enraged. But as Queen Bee gets lower in HP, she spawns more and more bees. It's neck and neck between them. Despite the Eater having over 3 times as much HP, his body deals much less damage, and Queen Bee Bee has the support of her bees, but she gets overconfident and falls into the Eater's trap, a pile of worms in the bottom of the pit, dealing over 2,000 damage in seconds. She's barely holding on against the Eater, a few more hits and she's lost the match. But her full power has been unleashed now, the bees are coming at maximum speed. The Eater is clever, he spends his time in the walls away from the bees, emerging to strike when she's weakest. She's down to 20 HP, the Eater goes in for the killing blow, but a lingering bee finishes him off. By the skin of her mandibles, Queen Bee has won. But the victory is short. The Eater gets his revenge as his minions beat her up outside in a drive-by biting. I can get Hellstone now, letting me get Molten Armor and, more importantly, the lava-proof bug net. By fishing in lava for wet bombs, I can get honey bombs, letting me get infinite honey. Because honey can be shimmered into hive blocks, that's my ticket for unlimited beehives and abeminations. But I don't need them quite yet. Queen Bee's next match is against Skeletron, and this time she can use her full strength from the beginning of the fight. Their first skirmish is short-lived because I died. The rematch begins, and this time Queen Bee will need to lean heavily on her bees. Skeletron deals higher damage and has far more HP. The bees don't have the speed to keep up with Skeletron, so I do my best to support her and keep him in place. The battle of the bees is not going well. She's nearly dead already, and I'm struggling to stay alive with her speed increases. I can't sustain this damage, and the bees aren't dying fast enough to drop hearts. With a lucky strafe into Skeletron, Queen Bee loses and drops me enough hearts to stay alive. She's got her sister Breenquee sitting in the sidelines though, and she rushes in to defeat the boss. I get a cobalt shield, and that's about all I can manage before she kills me. Now Queen Bee can truly shine. The Wall of Flesh, famously weak to bees, versus the Queen herself, is what I would say, if it were remotely possible. The jungle is mutually exclusive with the underworld. It is impossible to have a jungle biome if you're in the underworld. Queen Bee needs a jungle biome to spawn in. That makes it completely impossible to resummon Queen Bee during the fight. That wouldn't be so bad if Queen Bee was fully enraged, but she isn't, because we aren't on the surface, so her bee production is actually pretty low. It's not enough to get through the respawning hungry, and she gets absolutely bodied by the wall's contact damage. She can't even put a dent in his health bar, and I can't leave the underworld to resummon her if she dies. The Wall of Flesh is where Queen Bee only dies. But that isn't where we give up. Just because Queen Bee can't win the fight alone doesn't mean she can't win it with our help. By using beehives, we can provide bee reinforcements, enough to cut through the hungry and take down the wall itself. I need a lot of hives to make that work, and this is where the honey bombs come in. I can produce unlimited beehives this way, although it's not the fastest. Later on, I just grab some from an all items world to save the hours of throwing bombs in water. Without a way to fight back though, there's almost nothing I can do to stop the hungry that release, and the hungry still attached do obscene amounts of damage. I can't stay alive like this. I take him down below half, but after that I cut my losses and save my beehives. This fight is unwinnable like this. We have the damage, we just need to deal it better. I extend the bridge through completely legitimate means, it's now the entire underworld in length, and try again. But the hungry, again, are just too much for me to deal with. I need to stay further away and prioritize leading the bees into them instead of the wall. We get further, but my damage completely stagnates. To prevent NPC limit exploits, beehives cannot spawn bees if 100 NPCs already exist. And, over the course of the fight, the wall is spawning too many enemies. Near the end, our beehives aren't spawning enough bees to cut through the hungry and hit the wall itself. But that just means it's slower, not that it can't be done. Now, I prioritize killing leeches to open up spawn slots because worms count as multiple NPCs. I keep my distance from the hungry, he drops down to 1300 HP, and now we hit the end of the world. The fatal mistake I made at World Gen is coming back to haunt me. I chose a medium world, not a large. If you ever wonder why I usually make large worlds, that's why. That just means we need to do it better. Each time we've gotten closer and closer. Now there's a huge stream of hearts lining the arena, letting me be more aggressive with damage. And by using a builder potion, I can improve my BPS by dropping beehives faster. But it still isn't enough. I can get to 1,000, but I just don't have enough space for this. It would take a tactical genius to come up with a solution. And that's just what I am. By taking my entire medium-sized world and just pasting it into a large world, I've added 2,000 extra blocks of space to my underworld. And now, the battle is winnable. But he's just too fast below 1000 HP, the bees can't keep up anymore, they're spawning behind him now, and I have to travel further and further each time just to hit once. I try again, but I can't cut through that last 500 HP, I need to come up with a new strategy. The problem is, the beehives are taking too long to break, so I make a tunnel where they'll break faster. As long as I'm ahead of the wall, he'll run into the bees. But it's still not enough. He's outrunning the hives. We're getting closer and closer, but every time there's some new problem that pops up. I need the hives to break instantly. If they roll, the wall will outrun them. So I put in blocks every 3 tiles. I've got Queen Bee at the start of the fight to protect me from the hungry. I've got Hearts lining the arena to allow me to be aggressive, aggressive, but my damage is lower because I forgot the damn builder potion. It's fine, if I can't kill the wall without the builder potion, then I don't deserve to have it in the first place. 3000, 2000, 1000. We reach the tunnel for the last 500. The bee cannons activate. The wall finally dies. And that was just pre-hard mode. The bees, thankfully, are a regular enemy, which means their damage scales drastically in hard mode. Now, they do 2 to 3 times as much damage, about as much as Queen Bee herself, whereas in pre-hard mode they were much weaker than her. The first fight is against the Wyvern, and she can't even manage to kill one. We needed to call in a second Queen Bee, and that's a matchup that heavily favors her. As we can see from that, Queen Bee's 6000 HP is not gonna cut it for hard mode, so I need a lot of stingers to keep summoning her. But she can barely kill the hard mode jungle enemies. In fact, Queen Bee loses a head-to-head fight with a single tortoise. I make a dedicated stinger farm, but I barely come out positive using Queen Bee to farm them. It takes multiple Queen Bees to kill these enemies once, and Moss Hornets actually have pretty low drop rates for stingers. So, back to bee enforcements. I just use beehives to kill them because otherwise this would be unbearable. I get 100 abeeminations and pick on the destroyer first, hoping that her success against the Eater and Wyverns would mean she'd do well against him. She doesn't. She's doing some damage, heavily front-loaded due to spawning a bunch of bees before the battle began, but she's losing the DPS test. After Skeletron, the reality is that Queen Bee is just too weak to handle these bosses alone. For the rest of the game, we're going to be supporting her with beehives. It was a grim night for bee kind. In the battle against the Destroyer, 13 queens were killed, and 600 hives had their bees extinguished. But the bees won. The twins should be the next easiest fight to win. With 2 health bars, the bees should be able to do twice as much damage. We're still failing the DPS test. Like the Wall of Flesh, the bees aren't fast enough to keep up with the movements. If I'm dodging, the bees can't hit them, and if the bees can't hit them, we can't kill them by morning. We have to face tank and get the bees to stay exactly where the twins are. My first attempt ends to spasmatism when I try to resummon Queen Bee. For the next time, I make a better setup. Now, I've got a teleporter to take me back to the jungle, and better block placement to get the bees exactly where I want them. With my help, Queen Bee takes down yet another boss. But those two were just the warm-up. Skeletron Prime is going to be a nightmare. He has high defense, multiple arms to distract bees, his health pool isn't split between 2 enemies like the twins, and he's very fast. We only had about a minute left in the night after the twins. I need to squeeze out a lot more damage to kill Skeletron in the same time frame. I do have an ace up my sleeve though. By standing completely still, Skeletron hovers in a pretty consistent location, and the constant bees attacking me will give me enough iframes to survive without issue. By placing hives like this, a sizable number of bees will bounce upward to attack him. With 13 seconds left in the night, I squeeze yet another victory for the bees. I only used 38 abeeminations fighting the mech bosses, and by the end of the pirate invasions, I was down to only 14 of my original 100. Nearly 50 queens died in the battle against them. On the bright side, that does mean I'm making mountains of money by selling all of her loot. I get 2 pieces of turtle armor and get prepared for Plantera. I could fight her using only Queen Bee, but it would be abysmally slow. Queen Bee is not enraged at all, making her bee production absolutely pitiful. Plus, I'm using turtle armor, which is drawing all the bee aggro to me. Aggro works by making enemies think you're closer to them than you actually are, which means the bees chase me down instead of the bosses. So now I need to loop the bees into the bosses instead of having them do it for me. And Plantera is not an easy boss to do that with. Queen Bee herself does strike the final blow, and Golem is Golem. We fight him in the temple, die once because I need to position myself awkwardly for the bees to hit him, fight him in a much larger arena where the bees are far away enough to aggro to him, and then he dies. Each challenge in Hardmode has been getting more and more difficult to execute. Our bees are at maximum damage now, higher than Queen Bee herself. But in order to survive and kill the Moonlord and Cultist, we need a lot of defense and regeneration. And at the same time, the armors and accessories that provide defense also give increased aggro, which means the bees won't try to attack the bosses. The best armor that doesn't give increased aggro is, of course, Valhalla Knight armor, which is completely impossible to obtain here. I can't place beehives due to creative shock, and Queen Bee will just kill the crystal. The next best armor that doesn't give increased aggro is Shroomite, so I get that. That isn't enough to survive the Cultist, not even close. During the clone attack, the Cultist is only activated by player-based sources of damage. The bees can't hit the correct Cultist to cancel his cloning attack. In fact, they can't even trigger the wrong Cultist. There's no way to stop him from summoning enemies, and I can't survive them, and if I give myself a bunch of defensive gear, the bees won't be hitting the Cultist at all. We've got a Bouncy Dynamite only this. Back in the Bouncy Dynamite challenge, I faced the same problem, so I made a little teleporter setup to position myself above the Cultist to consistently hit him and use shark statues to iframe enemies and stay alive. We'll do the same thing here with a crab statue. Queen Bee is absolutely useless during this fight. She just dashes into the dragon and instantly dies. We can get the bees to hit the Cultist and stay alive while doing it. His armies grow in size, and unfortunately, mine begin to wane. You see, he's spawning so many ancient visions that we're actually reaching the bee cap. Remember, if 100 NPCs are in the world, I can't spawn more bees from hives. And there's nothing I can do about that. The bees are breaking on his ancient visions, he's barely getting scratched, and as the fight goes on, he's only spawning more and more ancient visions, making me deal less and less damage, until eventually I won't be spawning any bees at all. Queen Bee is no use here. She gets destroyed instantly, and after long enough, I wouldn't even be able to summon her because there would be 200 NPCs in the world. There's nothing I can do here. Even with the hives, I can't break through his waves of ancient visions. That is until about 4 hours later when I realized there was a fatal flaw in my strategy. You see, I'm teleporting up here. This is because in Bouncy Dynamite only I had to throw it from above, and beehives fall down when you place them, so it makes sense to place them from above. But this is causing the ancient visions and phantasmal dragons to move on top of the Cultist's location, killing my bees and giving them enough time to overwhelm me. I need to stand still and drop my beehives on him directly. The problem is that he's quite far away. Even with a builder potion, I can't reach that high. Even with an extendo grip, it's not high enough. Even with a tool belt, I need a builder potion, extendo grip, tool belt, and tool box, the accessory that you get from presents during Christmas, which we're gonna pretend I legitimately obtained. Now, my BPS is constant. We're hitting him non-stop, and the summoned enemies aren't constantly killing my bees. He doesn't have time to summon his armies, and the bees sting him to death. The pillars sucked. It's just repeatedly dying and placing, quite literally, thousands of beehives to slowly whittle down the enemies. But there is something very cool to see here. You see, pillars don't have contact damage. They're the only enemies that lack it, along with the Moonlord. But bees, when hitting an enemy, deal their damage and take the enemy's contact damage. So what happens when a bee hits an enemy with 0 contact damage? Well, they still take 1 point of damage. They'll just amass on top of the pillar without ever dying and easily kill it. The same is true for hitting the Moonlord. In fact, the same is true for hitting critters. And now we've got the biggest puzzle of all. How the hell do I kill the Moonlord? For one, he's fast. If I'm dodging him, the bees can't keep up. His eyes will open and close periodically too, causing the bees to lose aggro. So I can't be dodging him, otherwise I wouldn't be able to deal damage. 2, he heals. A lot. The bees might be able to kill the leeches in time, but if they can't, I have to dodge them. But I can't dodge them, because then the bees wouldn't be able to hit him. 3, he hurts a lot. This is on Master Mode. We can't get Valhalla Knight, and any defensive bonuses we have are going to give me increased aggro, which means the bees won't attack him, but we have to tank his attacks, because if we move around, we can't hit him. I really only have two options. One is to build an elaborate teleporter setup that auto-dodges all of his attacks, keep him in a location where the bees can hit him and dodge his leeches. But that would be a visual nightmare, and it's much less interesting than option 2, which is to make a small system of manually activated teleporters to dodge and position him where I need. I take note of exactly where his eyes are and prepare small boxes to trap bees in those spots. His top eye is extremely consistent while his hands move around a wide area. I need to be exact because I need to make a fully defensive build, and the bees will not, under any circumstance, attempt to attack the Moonlord. I get Flesh Knuckles, Foam for Paladin shields, I even get an Ankh shield in case I need to let the bees hit me to prevent poison. I didn't ultimately need to do that because the bees are just a little bit too slow to kill the leeches, but it was a precaution. This is a lot of defense, but it's not enough to face tank the Moonlord outright. If you remember from Lawnmower Only, I had an even better setup on a lower difficulty, and I still had to synchronize the True Eye of Cthulhu releases to stay alive. But I can't synchronize shit here, I have very little control over the bees. So, we need to dodge. I make a 3-step teleporter to avoid the death ray and the eyes. Phase 1 goes by smoothly, but once those true eyes pop out, everything goes to hell. He heals for 5000 HP while one of his hands is still alive, meaning I now need to deal that damage again while getting harassed by the most annoying enemies in the fight, and their attacks are out of sync. The death rays are blocked by blocks, but the eyeball attacks do way too much damage to sustain. I put the nurse nearby and used her about a dozen times throughout the fight. I would have died without her. The last eye comes out, and it only gets worse. I have to constantly teleport to avoid his healing, place beehives the moment I come back because the bees despawn each time I teleport, and wildly move around to avoid the devastating True Eye attacks. The nurse keeps leaving her house or dying, putting me at constant risk of death, and the last of my fragments went into this summon. I can't re-summon him without doing the pillars again. By swapping in the shiny stone, I improve my ability to sustain quite a lot. It's still incredibly dangerous, but I'm fighting back. 80 minutes after summoning him, with his last 55 HP, I summon Queen Bee. One more trip to the nurse, but she dies. Queen Bee is dashing too high up. I need to leave my box to get her low enough. There's no more nurse as a failsafe. I'm putting everything on the line here. And I'm too slow. The tongue comes out, but my beloved magic conch saves me. I need to end the fight now. I drop the beehive to enable her contact damage. I fall down off my mount and line up her dash, and she deals exactly 55 damage to him just as he's about to heal. The Moonlord has died and the bees have won. I died 127 times, and Queen Bee, she died 128, 124 relics plus 4 that I accidentally sold. So suck it, Queen Bee, I'm better than you.